At about 2:15 in the early hours of the 2nd of June 1975, Jackie Montgomery was found laying dead on a living room floor. She was only 15, and I am so pleased to tell you that although it took 47 years, her murderer has finally been sentenced this year in 2023. And that makes this the oldest double jeopardy case in England and Wales. But before we get into it, the disclaimers do still apply. This is a true crime story. It involves real people. Them real people have real family members that are still alive. So although I do want you to comment and share, please do so with sensitivity. Let's start back at the beginning, all the way back 47 years ago. It was 1975, and Jackie Montgomery was a 15-year-old girl living with her dad in Islington, North London. Her mom had recently left to live in a nearby flat. And as I said, it was 2:15 in the early hours of the 2nd of June 1975 that Jackie's dad got home to their house, which was on 119 Offord Road in London. And it was in the ground floor living room of their house that he found Jackie laying on the floor. She'd been fatally stabbed through her heart, stomach and liver. The cord of an iron was wrapped around her neck. She had a burn mark on her leg, her skirt was pulled up, and so was a jumper. It was her time of the month, and a sanitary towel was on the floor not far from her body. The living room itself was in disarray. The phone was off the hook, a chair had been overturned, and there was a lock of Jackie's hair 3 feet away from her body, close to her tights and knickers. Her blood-stained diary was also nearby, and one of the pages had been partly ripped out. That particular page had the address of where her auntie was living, her auntie Josie, and detectives later discovered that the phone had been off the hook. It had been engaged since late on the morning of the 1st of June, suggesting that Jackie's murder took place then. And just to clarify here, although she weren't found till the next day, it was in the early hours. So it would only been about 14 hours or so, not 24. There'd been no forced entry at the property, and it was clear that, without a doubt, Jackie had been murdered, and likely by somebody she knew. It was also very obvious from the description that I've given that Jackie had been raped, but the post-mortem that was performed in 1975 didn't find any evidence of that. However, from the very start, there was one prime suspect, and that was Dennis Mcgrory. It wasn't long before Jackie's murder that her auntie Josie had ended a relationship with Dennis because he was violent towards her. And obviously, because he was violent and abusive towards her, when she'd left, she was trying to keep as much distance as possible. She didn't want him to know where she was. But since she'd left, and only about a week or two before Jackie's murder, Dennis had found out that Josie had been having an affair. Now, not only was she having an affair, but this man was a close friend of Dennis's. So it's thought that Dennis was livid, and he was desperate to find Josie to get some revenge by once again being violent towards her. He was that desperate, he was willing to inflict violence upon anybody who might know who she were. Inflict violence to extract the information of where she were. And as I've just indicated, Jackie knew exactly where she was living. She'd wrote it down in a diary. In a diary, she described a trip that she'd made with her auntie to Manchester, which is a long way from London, complete opposite side of the country. This diary entry said, "We went to the housing people in Manchester. They got a warrant for the both of us and the kids and told us to get back in the smoke because they had 15,000 of their own to see to. We got back about 9:30. We went straight to the police station, who got in touch with a duty welfare officer. She put us in a hotel called the Classic in King's Cross. It was a doss-hole, but a bed for the kids and us." So with this motive in mind, the police didn't waste any time. They quickly found Dennis and arrested him. It was the police and the prosecution's case that after an evening of heavy drinking, Dennis went to Jacqueline's home in an attempt to try and track down Josie. Upon his arrest, a screwed up piece of paper containing an address, 113 Papworth Gardens, was found in his pocket. The paper had very thin blue lines on it, just like Jacqueline's diary did. Unfortunately, at this time, the massive significance of that piece of paper wasn't known to the police. So when he was released 2 days later, on the 4th of June 1975, it was given back to him, along with the rest of his possessions. It was only later on that Jacqueline's diary had been examined, and it was discovered that that piece of paper had more than likely come from her diary. Now, I don't know how true this bit is, but obviously that piece of paper, that address, was supposed to be Josie's address. But I did read somewhere that it turns out that's not even where Josie was staying anyway. Again, I don't know how true that bit is, but that's what I read. Before his release, during the police interviews, Dennis denied having any sexual interest in Jackie, consensual or otherwise. He denied murdering her, and even denied going round to her house on that day. But the police thought they had enough circumstantial evidence against Dennis, and they charged him with Jackie's murder on the 15th of July 1975, which is 6 weeks after a body had been found. Can we keep in mind here that she's 15 and he's 28? And despite him denying it, the police did have witness statements to show that Dennis was sexually interested in Jackie. The year before her death, he tried it on with her while she was sunbathing on the roof of his family home. And when I say his family home, I mean where him, his partner, who is Aunt Josie, and their 2 children lived. And during this occasion, he tried to grab Jackie and he tried to kiss her. When asked about that in the interviews, he said, "We were just mucking around." There was also an occasion where Jackie had been babysitting for her Auntie Josie. Dennis came back drunk and he tried to kiss her and tried to put his hand up her skirt. And even worse than that, Jackie's sister, who's 13 months older than her, stated that Dennis had once said to her that he would like to rape her and her sister, Jackie. However, again, at the time, that was taken in jest. And Dennis did go to trial for this. It was 6 months later, on the 26th of January 1976. 28-year-old Dennis Mcgrory stood trial at the Central Criminal Court, charged with rape and murder of Jackie. However, at this point, the prosecution's case was still largely based on circumstantial evidence. So at the close of the prosecution's case, the judge withdrew the case from the jury and directed the jury to find Dennis not guilty. Dennis was acquitted of murder. Just imagine how Dennis must have felt. For 4, nearly 5 decades after that, he was a free man. He'd literally gotten away with murder. But this is a solved case. So how did they manage to prosecute him after all that time? Well, first of all, the Criminal Justice Act of 2003 allows an acquittal to be quashed and a defendant to be retried in the event of new and compelling evidence. And second of all, as we all know, medical science has come on leaps and bounds since then, especially DNA analysis. Let's not forget, he was acquitted in 1976, and DNA profiling wasn't used in a UK court for the first time until 10 years later in 1986. So many years later, Jackie's family asked for the case to be reviewed, and in November 2015 it was re-examined by the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Casework Team. Sorry, that's a mouthful. It was over 4 decades after the murder that the cold case review identified the upper and lower vaginal swabs had been taken at the post-mortem of Jackie. And as luck would have it, these swabs had been saved. They'd been retained for all that time. And when I say that's lucky, I mean it's really lucky. You only have to watch a few cold case investigations before you start hearing that crucial evidence, crucial DNA evidence, has been discarded. And if it hadn't been discarded, it's been lost or compromised and can't be used. So obviously samples were taken from these swabs and DNA analysis was performed. The upper vaginal sample showed a mixed DNA profile. It indicated the presence of DNA from at least 2 people. Those 2 people were Jackie Montgomery and Dennis Mcgrory. The lower vaginal swab also had a mixed DNA profile. It indicated the presence of DNA from at least 2 people, possibly more. The indication was that those 2 people could very likely be Jackie and Dennis. And that new evidence is certainly compelling enough to quash Dennis's acquittal. And so it was. 46 years later, Dennis Mcgrory, who at this point is living about 50 miles away in Newport Pagnell, Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire, was rearrested and once again charged with Jackie's rape and murder. And Dennis actually stood trial via video link in March 2022, but the jury was discharged after Dennis was taken ill. So the final trial of England's oldest double jeopardy case started at the end of November 2022 in Huntingdon Crown Court, which is in Peterborough. Some of the evidence included the DNA evidence, his track record for being violent towards women, his track record for threatening to use a knife, his injuries from the time of the murder, which he claimed to be a result of him being jumped by 4 geezers, as he worded it. If you don't know what geezers means, it's basically men. Further claiming that that attack had come because Jose had asked him to do it. And these injuries could still be used in court because the police took photos after he was arrested in 1975 and they still had him. They showed bruises on his lip and behind his ear, a long scratch on his neck, small scratches on his left wrist and right arm, and bruising on his knuckles. There was also witness statements, and we've already heard some of that, but the court also heard from two people that on the morning of Jackie's murder and after Jackie's murder, heard Dennis talking about Jose's relationship with his friend. And during that, he said that he was going to find Jose and give her stripes or cut her face. Obviously, the piece of paper that he'd stolen from Jackie's diary had never been recovered after the police gave it him back, but it was mentioned in court. Dennis claimed in police interviews that he was told by a woman outside a chemist on the 31st of May 1975 that that woman had been in the hospital in a bed next to Jose, and that Jose had given her the address and she'd given it him. However, Jose made it completely clear that she had not done any such thing, and Dennis didn't give any evidence at his trial, and the judge referred back to that, saying that he couldn't give any evidence. He couldn't explain the DNA, and he couldn't explain the variety of different stories he'd made to try and account for his whereabouts of that murder. Giving any evidence would only make him look worse. Quite heartbreakingly, expert medical evidence testified that Jackie could have survived. She would have been capable of movement for between 1 to 10 minutes after suffering them fatal wounds. And all of that time, she would have known that she was going to die. As well as the stab wounds, Jackie's post-mortem showed that she had injuries to her head, a lip, burn to her leg, and strangulation marks to her neck. The prosecution also told the court that when Jose moved to Manchester and Jackie had gone with her, Dennis blamed Jackie for Jose moving. And apparently Jose was unable to read and write, so Dennis believed that Jackie must have gone with her. She couldn't have gone alone. She would have needed assistance. And I don't think that's true. I think you'd be able to travel without being able to read and write. But she did go with her, so technically we're right there. Following a 2-week trial, it only took the jury 3 hours of deliberation to find Dennis Mcgrory guilty of Jackie Montgomery's rape and murder. The judge ordered Dennis back into the court to hear the verdicts. He walked into the dock slowly on crutches. When his barrister told him that the jury had reached a verdict, Dennis asked if the lawyer knew what it was. Obviously he said no, to which Dennis responded, "Oh, fingers crossed then." He was sentenced in Huntingdon, Peterborough on the 13th of January 2023. The judge deemed that Jackie's murder, although it entailed sexual conduct, wasn't sexually motivated. The judge also talked about the burn on Jackie's leg, pointing out that the burn was relatively new, and it was possibly a result of Dennis trying to torture her and get the information of Jose's location. However, the judge went on to say that that wasn't conclusive, and therefore it couldn't be considered in sentencing. However, the judge did recognise that Dennis had used violence to get the address from Jackie, and he'd used violence to rape her, and that after the murder, up until now, he still hasn't shown any remorse. Dennis wasn't of previous good character before the murder, and he wasn't of previous good character after the murder. He committed assault occasioning actual bodily harm in 1997, and possession of an offensive weapon and using violence to enter a premises in 2009. The facts of the latter offending in 2009, nearly 35 years on, offers a glimpse of your true personality, which has some chilling similarities with events in 1975. Time would not appear to have mellowed your personality. The facts are that you and your ex-wife were arguing. You said that she had to choose between you and her son. You said of her son, "I'm going to, expletive, kill him. I don't care how long I spend in prison." You went to a pub and returned home drunk in the evening. You forced your way into the house after being told you were not welcome. After a further argument, you picked up a kitchen knife. The others ran outside. You said to your stepson, "I'm going to kill you." Again, accompanied with other expletives. You chased your ex-wife and stepson into the street with a knife in your hand. Of course, this is a murder charge, so that means it has to be a life sentence. Now, in searching for a minimum term, this case is a lot more complicated. It's 5 decades old. So the judge explained things in no simple terms. The main thing I got from it was that there are laws in place to prevent offenders getting a heavier sentence than they would have at the time of the murder, or at the time of the offence. And obviously, laws change quite a bit. The judge went on to explain that because the murder included sexual conduct, it was classed as a higher seriousness. In adding that Jackie was only 15, it was even more serious. So the starting point for his minimum term was set at 30 years. The aggravating factors was that the murder was committed in Jackie's own home, where she was entitled to feel safe. Jackie was a vulnerable victim. There was a use of a knife to commit the offences. There was very significant suffering before death. The offences were committed while Dennis was intoxicated, and Dennis had destroyed the clothes that he was wearing while offending. The judge then clarified that although it's pretty much certain that Dennis went to the address with the intention of committing violence, there was no outright evidence of premeditation or that Dennis took the knife to the address. Going on to add that the already mentioned aggravating factors were enough to significantly rise his sentence. His mitigating factors were his age at the time of sentencing, which is 75, and his poor health, as well as the fact that his poor health and his medical conditions will make his life a lot harder in prison. So, with all that said, the minimum term for his life sentence was set at 35 years. However, I've said the judge can't sentence you to more than what you would have been sentenced to at the time of the offence. So the judge then had the job of finding out what the sentence would have been in the 1970s. And boy oh boy, was that a task. Let's do a really quick history lesson. Not only was DNA not used in courts in 1970s, but the Crown Prosecution Service didn't come out until the mid-80s. It started operating in 1986, which coincidentally is the same time that DNA was used in a court case. Another major change is how sentencing guidelines are actually set. At the time of the offence, there weren't actually any judiciary created sentencing guidelines in England and Wales. They only came about in the 1980s, and at that time it was the Lord Chief Justice who created these sentencing guidelines. The Sentencing Council, who currently sets the guidelines, has only been around since April 2010, so you can imagine how hard it must have been for this judge to weigh up this historic sentencing. His explanation into his findings of that sentencing went on and on, but ultimately the judge determined the appropriate sentence in the 1970s would have been a minimum of 26 years. Now, in the sentencing part, I don't usually report this, but when a judge passes a sentence, he says, right, it's 20 years, you've spent 200 days on remand already, so we'll deduct that off your sentence. That is a very, very common thing to happen, and I think they kind of have to do it. But what really shocked me in this case is not only did they deduct his time spent on remand for this trial, they also deducted his time on remand for the trial in 1976. And I think that's really wrong, but still, there was no extra charge for Jackie's rape either, because that had been used to count towards the murder charge. So Dennis Mcgrory had been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years, minus time on remand, but that brings it up to 25 years and something. It weren't all that long, couple hundred days. And something that's really interesting if you haven't noticed, it was on the 26th of January 1976 that he was acquitted in court, and it was on the 13th of January 2023 that he was sentenced. So it is so very, very nearly bang on 47 years. So it's time to pay tribute to Jackie Montgomery and hear the victim impact statements. And before we do, I just want to clarify, her name's Jacqueline Montgomery. The reason I'm calling her Jackie isn't out of disrespect or anything like that. The judge referred to her as Jackie, the court referred to her as Jackie, and that's the name that I usually go with, but I do feel that I have to add Jacqueline in every now and again out of respect. So if you're thinking it's very disrespectful using a nickname, the judge used it and therefore that's what I use. Just purely because that's obviously a name that the family are comfortable with being used. It said that Jackie enjoyed all the things a 15-year-old would typically enjoy. Listening to pop music from the likes of Donny Osmond and David Cassidy. She wanted a decent home life and somebody to love her. Jackie's sister, who was only 13 months older than Jackie, said, "Jackie and I always said we could trust no one. A violent man who had been living within our family murdered my sister. He has been able to live his life. He has spent nearly 50 years as a free man doing as he pleased. I find that unbearable when my sister didn't even reach her 16th birthday. His actions caused trauma to so many people, and there were no consequences for him. The investigation of the last few years has meant revisiting memories of the murder, which has caused pain and stress for me and my family. I am relieved that we can finally have justice for Jackie." Speaking outside the court after he'd been jailed, she said, "I'm just relieved. I don't know what to do with myself. It's taken so long. She suffered, that girl. She didn't deserve what she got. but he deserved what he got just now. When asked about how she felt about Dennis being out of prison for decades, she said, soul destroying. Soul destroying, knowing I could do nothing to get near him. We all knew he'd done it since day one. The detective superintendent of the Metropolitan Police's Central Specialist Crime Team said, Jackie was courageous and bright. She stood up for her auntie, who had fled from Mcgrory's violence and abuse. She is missed deeply by her siblings and by the other members of her family who are still alive, and my thoughts are with all of them today. Obviously, this has been an incredibly long and painful 47 years for Jackie's family. Not only are the parents passed away without ever seeing justice, it also led to one of her sisters attempting to take her own life. And that's all I've got for you. Do you know, for this case, which is a very, very rare occasion, I started researching it, I started writing it, and I was walking away quite up-spirited. And the reason I was walking away happier than usual and feeling a lot lighter than I usually do is because justice was finally being done, or justice had finally been done. And it also gave me hope for so many other people out there. There is so many cold cases out there, new and old, and this case does go, look, it doesn't matter how long it's been, things can change, justice can be done. And then I got home and I told my missus all about the case, and she said, so you're telling me he committed the offence when he was 28, and now he's 75, he's been put in prison? And I kind of clicked on as she was saying it. She said, well, that's not very much justice. He's lived all his life. And you know, that's true. I can't remember the average age of life expectancy in the UK for a male, but it is about 70. It's the 70s. I think it was 71, might be 75. But he's now at the age of average life expectancy for a male in the UK. He has lived a full life and only now seeing justice. And that really does take away a lot for this. It really has changed the perspective of this. Like I said, there's still hope for other cases, and I'm still really happy he's finally been put in prison. But wow, and that's a much more negative way of looking at it than I do. I look at everything quite positively. But it really is sad that, and it is a massive shame that he's managed to live this long, and it's a massive shame that he's only just been caught. Like I said, the positive side to that is at least he has been caught, at least, because if he had died as well, there wouldn't have been a trial. We don't prosecute dead people in the UK, so if he'd passed away, would have never known if he were or weren't guilty. So at least now, it'll always be known that this is what he did, and that's what he'll always be known for. That is one good side of it. And again, if you know of a cold case, if you're a family member relevant to a cold case, don't ever give up. There is always hope. As always, my love goes out to Jackie Montgomery's family. I hope after this sentence, in light of his sentence, they can now live a little bit happier, a little bit lighter, knowing that at least something's been done, at least the records have changed, and at least he's where he belongs. All I'm saying is, I love you. Take care of yourself, take care of those around you, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Oh wait, before I do, I did want to say something that I very rarely get around to saying on these episodes. A massive thank you to the Patreons and the members. For £1, £3 a month, that makes a massive difference. And it's for that, them donations, them memberships and Patreons, that is the reason I can post so many videos. There should be some more midweek videos coming up soon, but it is thanks to you guys. So thank you so much for your support. And obviously I support everyone else too. There's no speciality here. It's just these people are financially helping, and it really does enable me to make more videos. Until next week guys, I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And I'll see you next week. Bye.